History program, Tuesday, March 19th, 1974. First, Roy, I'm going to ask you on a little bit of your background, and where were you born and raised?
I was born in Mercer County, Ohio, and the biggest share of my life was I was raised in Lima then. My parents moved to Lima, Ohio when I was about 2 years old.
Yeah. What year were you born?
1901.
1901.
Mm-hmm.
And what did your father do?
Well, he was a farmer at the time, but he moved to Lima and he went to work for the gas company.
Yeah. And did you have brothers and sisters?
I had one brother,
Yeah.
Ray.
Yeah.
He was older than I am. He died in the meantime.
Yeah.
Just me and my mother left anymore.
Yeah.
And so they all moved out in California. I think Ray moved out in California in the early 20s.
Uh-huh.
And then Mother went out there. I think the last trip she made was in the 40s. I had a stepfather.
Uh-huh. Your father...
My father died when I was about 13 or 14 years old, so I had to quit school.
Uh-huh.
And had to start to help Mother bring a little bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
So that was... and my mother remarried his name was Bill Conley.
Uh-huh.
And he was he took care of buildings and stuff like that. And he was a carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
And they moved out to California, I think, in the 40s, wasn't it?
Did your mother and stepfather have children?
No.
Tell me about your mother being 96 today.
My mother is 96 years old today.
96 years old today.
And Agness and I were married 50 years ago yesterday.
Oh, well, this really is a treat then.
Golden wedding anniversary yesterday.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something else, George, that happened on my golden wedding anniversary. There's if you remember that Torino Ford that Miss Honeywell had?
Yes.
They gave it to Agness and I.
Good.
Yesterday when we come back, we didn't know that. We come back yesterday, and Joe Nixon says, Roy, he says, we got a wedding present for you. You're going to have that Ford. The way you took care of it, you're going to get it.
Well,
I just give it to us.
I think that's great. On your golden wedding anniversary,
yesterday.
You certainly don't look like it. You don't look.
Thank you,
No,
George.
really, I'm serious. I didn't think that.
I'm 72 years old.
72 years old. Then your mother is still living in California.
She's 96 today.
Yeah, I think that's amazing.
She's not too well, though.
That the people that live and children go on and golden wedding anniversaries, and the mother is still living and so forth.
We had two daughters. One of them's in Lima, and the other's in Castleberry, Florida, and that's where we're going to go the 3rd of April. Go down and stay a couple, 3, 4 weeks with Mary Lou and Bud. That's my son-in-law.
What did you do, Roy, for a living up until the time you came to Mrs. Honeywell?
I was in the grocery business for 27 years. Then when I got this job over here, I was working for the city of Lima in the office, and I had charge of the collection of your refuse.
Yeah.
And garbage and the refuse collection. And I worked in the office there till we come over here in 1957.
Good. Okay, now I'm going to ask Agness. Agness, bring me up to date on, first of all, you better give me your maiden name.
Wendelmoot.
Is that one name or two?
That's one name.
That's
good old Irish and Dutch.
How do you spell it?
Wendelmoot.
Well, of course, you haven't used it for 50 years. It's amazing that she can remember how to spell it. Yeah. Well, I think that's nice. And what was your family background, and where were you born?
Well, I was born in Chillicothe, Ohio, and my father died when I was 3 years old. And I had an older brother that had to keep the home fires burning. Mm-hmm. And when I was 7, he moved us to Lima, Ohio. Mm-hmm. He worked for the Lima Locomotive Works, building engines. And, we just settled there, and then...
Did you go to school in Lima?
Went to school in Lima.
Yeah. Go to high school in Lima?
High school.
Mm-hmm.
Part of high school. Mm-hmm. I was like Roy. I had to quit school and and help too.
Mm-hmm. Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have. I had 2 brothers and 1 sister. Mm-hmm. And my sister and my one brother's gone. I have 1 brother in Lima.
That's still living.
And I started out in the ready-to-wear business. And it's kind of like I'm bragging, but I did a lot of modeling. And then, as I got older, I was a buyer and also sold merchandise until we came over here to Wabash.
How did you meet Roy?
That was Mickey. Your sister was living. Wolford was Mickey.
Yeah, my sister was with her friend, and her friend brought Roy out one night, and she wanted me to meet him. And I just didn't think, nah, you know. So about 3 years later...
Yeah, just about 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years...
before we got married.
Yeah, 3 years later, I really met you then, didn't I? Or started going with you.
Well, we went together for 3 years.
Yeah, we went
Then
together
you went
for
together
3
for
years.
3 years.
Uh-huh. I guess I changed mine along. He had another girlfriend, see, and he was biding his time between the two of us. But I won.
You won. And where were you married then?
In Lima,
At
Ohio.
Was it a big wedding? And
No, just medium, you know.
yeah, just a family and.
And then, as Roy says, we have had our 2 daughters, and just don't seem possible. It's been 50 years ago.
Yeah, I think this is amazing. I'm going to ask you now. I'm going to start with you again, Roy. How did you happen to come in contact with Mrs. Honeywell for the
Claire
to be employed?
Remember Claire DeCurtin worked at the center?
Yes.
Well, her sister worked with my oldest daughter in a doctor's office. So Claire came home one day and told Elizabeth about Honeywell's had been in Europe but looking for a couple to take. I see these colored people, what's Mamie, I guess was his name, died. So Claire was telling Elizabeth that. So Elizabeth told Mary Lou at the office the next day about Claire being home and about they was looking for a couple, and that right away Elizabeth says, and Mary Lou says, your dad and mom. Of course, as I say, I worked at the city and Eggs worked at Greg's. So nothing to do, but we had to go out to DeCurtin's that night. It was on Saturday, I can remember that. And Claire called Mrs. Honeywell and made an appointment for Sunday afternoon. So we came over, and that's where we first met Mr. and Mrs. Honeywell. That was in 1957, wasn't it? Summer of 57.
Yeah. What was your first impression when you met the Honeywells?
Well, I said, we've often said to ourselves, we got to see my mother, why don't we get a job, Agness, working for some millionaire? And I said, Agness said, hey, maybe that would be something. We often thought about working for millionaires. And that's, I suppose, when that hit us, I said, well, there's our chance. Now we want to work for millionaires. Here's our chance. You couldn't get a bigger one.
Yeah.
I said, well, and of course we was about 2 months making up our mind to come over here. But
was Mr. Honeywell still active and?
Well, he had started slipping a little bit. He had days. No, we didn't notice it at first, but after we was with him a while, he would have days he wasn't normal, and other days he'd be fine. Till we went to Florida. I think when we went to Florida that last year, we went to Florida. He never had any good days. They were all bad ones.
Yeah. What was your impression, Agness, of meeting Mr. and Mrs. Honeywell for the first time?
Well, meeting them was just wonderful. But I wasn't interested in leaving Lima or my job. And we spent the afternoon with them, and they even took us out to the lodge. And Mrs. Honeywell was so gracious and nice. And this was on Sunday, and I was to let her know Tuesday. Well, definitely Tuesday. Before I called her, it was no, but before she got through with me, it was yes. And we kept that up for 2 months, so we finally decided to come over. And we'd worked with them in Wabash for 2 months, and then had to go to Florida with them for the winter. And we thought, well, we know their style of living, that we could get by. When we got down there, we found out we didn't know a thing about their way of living. It was just reverse, And we hadn't been in Florida too long until she said, Agness, I'm going to have a cocktail party for the 100 Club. And I said to her, what's a 100 Club? She said, well, it consists of 100 millionaires.
Mm-hmm.
And she said Mr. Honeywell was president for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, dear Father, you know. But anyway, we got through that. And it was just one big party after another, but we weathered it.
Uh-huh.
And we were going to, I told her that I thought I would go back home.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me, she said, well, that's fine. I'll fly you home. Well, I had never flown. And I said, Miss Honeywell, when I go home, I'm going to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
And Roy had taken Mr. and Mrs. Honeywell that evening to the club.
No,
And I was going to go over home. We lived in the guest house. And I thought, well, I'll go over and I'll just get our things ready and we'll go home. Well, I got to thinking about it. And I thought, I can't leave Mrs. Honeywell with him because we could manage Mr. Honeywell.
Mm-hmm.
He took a liking to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, I can't do that. Now here Roy and the Honeywells had gone. Roy didn't know that I had changed my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And they came home about 11 o'clock. I went out to the car and I said, Miss Honeywell, I'm not going to leave you.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you just go to bed and get a good night's sleep. And I said, we'll stay with you. Well, she put her arms around me and so on and so forth. And we weathered it. I was homesick. I was terribly homesick.
Uh-huh.
And I lost 22 pounds that winter. And Roy lost 18 worrying about me.
That was a good diet.
yeah, it sure was.
But you didn't have to be with her too long until you just realized that she needed you and you couldn't leave her.
Let me go on to another subject here. Okay. Is when you started, I'm going to ask Roy, when you started with Mrs. Honeywell, did she have any established jobs that you were supposed to do or had to do, or she more or less let you go on your own? Or?
Well, we just went on our own. If I see something to do, I'd just do it. I said if it was a costly affair, then I would go to her just in the car. But if it's just like having a motor tune-up or something, I'd go have that done. But if it's something major, cost any amount of money, then I'd go to her.
Uh-huh.
That's the way we operated. If I see something around the house that needed fixing, I'd just go fix it.
Yeah. Did you have any established parameters that...
No, she started right in from the beginning to tell us that we worked too hard and too long. But we had been accustomed to working longer hours, and as Roy said, anything had to be done. We just pitched in and got it done, and she never questioned anything that you bought in the way of shopping. She never knew what they were going to eat until we served them. We took all of that responsibility. And then when she decided, really before she decided to go down at 720 North Wabash, she asked us if we'd stay with her. And we said yes. But truthfully, we didn't know what we was getting into. But we managed that, and we weathered it. But as far as, if she wanted something done, she'd always say, now, when you get time, would you do this or that? But never domineering or do this or do that. No, never.
Roy, were you satisfied right from the start that you'd made the right decision to go to work for Mrs. Honeywell?
You know, definitely. Yeah. We knew we had put a lot more hours in, but we never nobody held a stick over your head. You know, you could work. If you got tired, you go downstairs and sit down. And just I said, I'll never forget the time we had been there about 10 years, and she was in Rome, and she called up, and if you remember right when Fred Waring was here, and she says, I'm going to have a cocktail party that night. So we said fine, and she says, I don't know if she told us just how many, but evidently she did. We had 28. So she come in the house at about 5 minutes 11 with 28 people and hadn't been in the house for 6 weeks. And I could always remember this. Fred Waring and Miss Honeywell were at the bottom of the
at the table getting ready to be served, and see, it was a buffet, and she says, "You mean to tell me you've been gone all this time? You come in the house and you got something like this? We really had it fixed up, elegant." And he said, "Well, I'd like to meet those people." And Miss Honeywell says, "Well, now up there's one of them, and I was dishing up tetrazzini at the time." Mm-hmm. So he came up and shook hands with me, and Miss Honeywell says to him, she says, "Another one, Mr. Waring, if you go out and lift up the hoods on the cars, you could have white gloves on and wouldn't get them dirty." Mm-hmm. And then at that time she took Mr. Waring out to the kitchen to meet Agness. Mm-hmm. But and then for doing the job that we had done, we had a daughter and was in Anchorage, Alaska. Mm-hmm. She was a Navy man, and so what she did, she paid the tab for us to go up to see Mary Lou and Bud in Anchorage, Alaska. And when we came back, she was in Chicago to meet us, and we took her to John's cottage then on our way back and dropped her off.
What was the lifestyle like when you started with Mr. and Mrs. Honeywell? How did they live, Agness?
Well, I wouldn't say elegant. I'd say very nicely. Mm-hmm. But after we moved to 720, mm-hmm. then it was a different style altogether. Mm-hmm. For one thing, she couldn't entertain because Mr. Honeywell not being well. I should put it that way. Uh-huh. But after we got a 720, moved to 720, Miss Honeywell loved formality, uh-huh. and that was her way of living. Uh-huh. And everything was formal. Mm-hmm. And we kept it that way also to please her. And she never had to worry. She has told us mm-hmm. that this wouldn't be done or that wouldn't be done, because when we learned her style of living, we gave her our all. We did just what she wanted done.
In other words, there was none of this hot dogs out on the lawn type entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
No, but now when Mrs. Honeywell was there alone, like for her dinners, mm-hmm. And we served her formal just the same, but she loved down-to-earth food.
What kind of food did she enjoy that you would prepare for her?
The Miss Honeywell liked? Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. You could give her homemade noodles. She loved it. Mm-hmm. You could boil pork, and she'd love it. Mm-hmm. Cornbread, and like bread pudding and all. Just natural way of cooking.
I understand that Mrs. Honeywell had quite a collection of cookbooks.
Yours?
We have over 500.
500 cookbooks.
Uh-huh. But that didn't mean a thing to me, because if I'd want to find of course, now, like, she'd take cookbooks to her bedroom at night, and I'd say to Roy, uh-oh, something's coming. And I know one morning she came down, she had 7 cookbooks in her arm, and there was was having a big dinner, and there was a recipe from each book. Uh-huh. And, well, I'm Dutch and Irish, and if it needs a little of this or a little of that, if that book don't say so, that doesn't mean a thing to me, mm-hmm. you know. Mm-hmm. And maybe I would look in one of the cookbooks to find the base of something that I had to fix, and from there on, why I carried it on. Mm-hmm. Because she'd say to me, with different recipes, she'd say, "Now, what book did you get this out of, you know?" And I'd say, "Up here."
Yeah.
And this is kind of funny. When we went over, I didn't know she had so many cookbooks. And I had one little cookbook that I took with me, a little 25-cent cookbook. And, well, we often laugh about our little 25-cent cookbook. So one night, I made bread pudding. And, oh, she just thought that was elegant. She said, "That's just like my grandmother used to make it." And she said to me, "Now, what book is this in?" And I said, "My little 25-cent cookbook." And that was just always a joke with us from then on, you know. But she was a person that appreciated anything that you could cook, and Roy would decorate the trays so pretty, which made the food taste better too, you know. And anything new that you wanted to fix, she would go for that.
Roy, were you responsible for the greenhouse too?
No, she had when she first went out there, she took a lot of time in the greenhouse. But the last 2 years, I'd say, we knew that she didn't feel so good.
You didn't have to raise the flowers that you put on the table or anything like that.
We generally, in the fall, put some begonias or something in there because they kept blooming all the time, and I used them for my finger bowl, see?
Yeah.
Because you had to have a flower. If you had 10 finger bowls, you had to have 10 little flowers to go in the finger bowl. So that kind of perturbs us a little bit at times.
Weren't you, when you started, weren't you any hesitant at all? I mean, now you were thrown into a different world of finger bowls and formal entertaining. That didn't bother you coming out of a grocery store and a dress shop?
No.
And you just slid right into it?
Yeah.
Just fell right in line.
See, over in Lima there, I worked for the city, and then I had a friend of mine had a catering place.
Uh-huh.
And he had me help him lots of times, see, and lots of times I'd go in, I'd have to make cheese trays or vegetable trays or whatever he had to decorate, and then he had to help him serve, see.
Uh-huh.
So I had a pretty good inkling of what was going on, but not as much formality as we had over here.
Yeah.
We never used finger bowls till we came over here, but way we did it, Mrs. Honeywell, she said, I practiced on Mr. and Miss Honeywell. She told me how to do it, and that was it. A couple of times, and that was it. But no, it didn't perturb me. I was telling, what was this girl we eat with, Linda?
Linda, yes.
I was telling Linda a little incident we had out there one night. Miss Honeywell had a bunch of older people from Wabash, and I couldn't remember their names anymore, but one of the gentlemen's got pretty well along, see, on the cocktail hour. So he was sitting there at the table, and he wanted to know what kind I was serving him, and I said, well, sir, I'd have to check the bottle. So I said, I'm not much of a drinker. I said, if I got whatever kind of bourbon I've got, that's what I was using, see. And I said, I'll have to look, and I'll tell you on the way back. And I happened to be putting finger bowls down.
Uh-huh.
So I told him when I put the lady's finger bowl down next to him, I told him, and he says, now you're going to have to help me about this finger bowl. He says, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, when I come back, when you're putting yours down, I'll whisper it in your ear.
Uh-huh.
So when I came back, when I was putting it down, I took it kind of slow, and I said, you just take that finger bowl off and that doily, put that doily underneath of it, and you're all set.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him what kind of bourbon I was figuring. I think it was Old Fitzgerald at that time, but we had so many different brands. I said, I'd have to check them, because me personally, I don't never taste it. I don't even drink it, see.
Yeah.
But he got a big kick out of that. And then when he got ready to leave, he came out and he couldn't get done thanking me and Agness for how we helped him along with it.
He mixed them and I tasted them.
Yeah. If I'd mix a drink and I said, well, I don't just sound just right, Agness, maybe you better taste it, see if it's all right, because I said, I don't like it.
Yeah. Let me change the tape. I'll make this the end of part one. Let me see. I'm going to ask you some other questions now. How about, did Mrs. Honeywell, was she much of a sleeper, or did she...
Sleeper.
Mm-hmm.
Very light sleeper.
Very light.
She slept when I...
And, because many a morning, Roy would have her coffee up. We had her spoiled. She knew it, and she said she loved it. So, a little after 6, Roy would take her up a carafe of coffee and some fruit. And then about a little after 7, I'd take her tray up. But when I first go up, I'd say to Roy, is her door open yet? And he'd say yes. And I said, why don't she sleep in the morning, you know? Mm-hmm. But one thing I don't want to forget to tell you, that no matter who came to the house, they were all treated the same, regardless of what walk of life. With dinners or parties, it made no difference. And I always admired her for that. And so many times after school, youngsters, I'd say 8, maybe 9 years old, would come to the door and didn't want to know if Miss Honeywell was home. Well, I'd wait. I'd go ask her, see if she wanted to talk to them. Those children always came in, and she took time to talk to them. And I thought that myself. I thought that was wonderful.
I think so.
But I know that at times Mrs. Honeywell was thought of as being snobbish.
Mm-hmm.
Miss Honeywell was never snobbish. And she liked to be treated just as an individual. You know what I mean? No
Pretentious.
flair. Yeah.
Roy, your responsibilities also included taking Mrs. Honeywell in the car and other places.
Oh yeah. When we were going on the last trip I had, we went to some big affair in Indianapolis, and we had to stay all night. That was one of the last trips I took. It was the last trip I took her, and we stayed with Mrs. Burkhart. And of course, I didn't know where we was going tonight, so Miss Burkhart used her houseman to do the driving. And of course, they put me up in the same house where Mrs. Honeywell stayed.
Mm-hmm.
And I often told Agness about this affair there. That house was 196 feet long. And I never seen a house in my life as long as that one was, and as arranged as nicely as that was arranged. She had more modern furniture than Miss Honeywell. Miss Honeywell had a lot of older furniture, antiques, I'd call them.
Mm-hmm.
But Miss Burke had a lot of new stuff.
Yeah.
But whenever she's going any place and where a lot of well-to-do people, then I always drove her. You had your chauffeur uniform on and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if I know one time we was having an affair out there that it was a full dress affair. So what she did, she sent down a Biting Wolf and got me a tuxedo and everything. And I think on the war thing a couple times.
Mm-hmm. So you would be part of the group.
Yes, sir, of course. And then anytime you needed anything, you just tell you. I was in the process of buying me a new serving jacket because every night I had to put my white shirt and black tie if she was here by herself. That's what you did. You didn't go in there with your shirt sleeves on. You went in just like you had guests.
Mm-hmm.
But every night at 5:30, I'd serve her cocktails, and at 6 o'clock, if we were ready to serve her dinner, then I'd serve the dinner. Set the tray just exactly as if we had guests.
Mm-hmm. But you had to dress every night.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And if you went any place, there's a rule we've done, well, here since it's energy charters, we did use a Ford once in a while, but if we was going on an affair where, like the races in place, there was always a Cadillac.
Uh-huh. Now, how did you have to dress then, Agness? I mean,
Just white uniform and white shoes.
Uh-huh.
A black dress with white collar and cuffs if it was a dinner.
Mm-hmm. Did Mrs. Honeywell's relationship with the grandchildren and with John in particular? Of course, I was going to do John, Wednesday before the fire, and John was tied up over at the office, so I'm going to let the thing ride until John is more.
Well, John's her pride and joy,
and I had heard.
And those grandchildren always came first. She was so proud of her grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And Jane, because they are a wonderful family.
Mm-hmm.
We've been in their home many times, and she was just proud of them.
Yeah. If she and John had a lot in common.
Oh yes, oh yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how about Joe and Marion and the rest of the family? I presume she saw quite a bit of all of them.
Yes, oh yes, Marion came over an awful lot, and Joe was there a lot for meetings. The three of them would have a meeting. Mm-hmm. And no, she's very proud of her family.
Yeah. Can you remember any funny incidents that happened with the grandchildren?
You mean with Miss Honeywell?
Yes.
No. As a rule, when it came to the house, we always had to be teaching them a lot of formality. And of course, when they're home, they didn't have so much formality. See, that, in other words, John's home don't have the formality, but Honeywell's home did have. But there wasn't much funny things went on at the house with the grandkids.
Yeah. Would she have the formal sit-down dinner with the grandchildren also?
And try to teach them as she went
yeah.
along, even when they were real small.
Uh-huh.
And would always have to get them finger bowls. Then she'd teach them how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, they don't do that at home. But they had enough respect for her that if you were to serve them now, they know how to handle a finger bowl and their silver.
Yeah. Did Mrs. Honeywell must have over the years had some extremely interesting guests to stay? Can you remember any in particular? Some of the opera singers and that have stayed at the house.
Oh, you mean at the house?
Yes.
Well, we'll see. We had a Mr. Roosevelt. I can't tell you which one. And Blanche Thiebaum and Roberta Peters and real tall fellow piano player.
Oh, Van Cliburn.
Yeah.
Van Cliburn.
Did any of these people have any eccentricities or odd food habits or anything that you had to cater to?
No.
No.
And Mrs. Honeywell would really be in her real environment when she would be entertaining these artists. I'm certain with her background in music and her flair for entertaining and your good cooking and Roy's good serving. You told one time you were talking to Rita and me down at the concert series, and Rita asked you if this one particular opera singer ate much, and or what she had any particular taste, and you said she not only ate, but she ate everything and a lot of it. It must have been one of the heavier set opera singers that...
I can't remember which one it was. We've seen so many of them. Which one it was that used to come out in the kitchen, and she had, when she was mixing her drinks, you wouldn't be allowed to mix it in the silver. She had to have glass or something. What was
That was Blanche Thiebaum.
Yeah.
Because we always use silver mixers.
Uh-huh.
And she found that out. She came out. She says, I'll mix the drinks tonight.
Uh-huh.
Roy got red from here up. And we just let her mix them, see, because...
She didn't believe in a silver mixer, huh? She wanted to make
no,
it
she said she could taste it.
Yeah.
I told her she could taste that. I'm his wife. If she could taste that, boy, she got me.
Yeah.
Whether it was mixed in glass or in silver.
Yeah.
Who am I to argue?
She had, so many guests, overnight guests.
Uh-huh.
And no matter who they were, what walk of life, the rooms were all fixed the same. You had ice water, you had candy, you had cigarettes, you had magazines, you had fresh flowers. Anybody that stayed overnight got the same treatment.
Mm-hmm. I'll be darned.
And their bed turned down, and their night clothes across a certain way across the chair.
Uh-huh. How would you two ever get away for a vacation?
Well, the last 2 years we didn't get away because we had Miss Honeywell not feeling so good the last couple of years. We didn't take any last year, and then, of course, the fire came this year. Mm-hmm. So we haven't had a vacation now for 2 years.
We could have, but we couldn't leave her.
Mm-hmm.
We felt our responsibility, and we could read her. You know what I mean? We could read her minds, and we just, if we'd go home over a weekend, which we did once in a while, then Roy'd say on Saturday morning, call Miss Honeywell, see how she is. Well, she would put up a big front. Well, sure, I'm all right, she says. And I said, well, Roy just wanted me to call you. We went home. We worried about her.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, this last year, she hasn't been too well. We knew it. Even the family didn't know certain things until we've told them after the fire, you know. Mm-hmm. But little things that we'd see her do.
Yeah. What do you think the success has been of your job? Obviously, the two of you were extremely well pleased. What would you say the success was, Roy?
We've learned a lot. We've learned how to cope with different people in a different walk of life than we've always been with the public. Mm-hmm. But you handle them a little differently than you would guests in your home.
Mm-hmm. I just want to tell you one little incident, George. I don't know if I told you this or not before. When we come over here yesterday, because as I told you, it's our 50th one anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And I told Joe, I was in Joe Nixon's house, and Marion was there, and I says, had to tell him about our 50th anniversary. He said, Roy, Agnes, we got a nice wedding present for you. And George, they give us that Torino Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And I says, we haven't got over that yet.
Yeah, I think that's just wonderful.
Isn't that wonderful?
But you know what I think your success has been, really?
What?
I bet you'd never guess. You've maintained your independence. Right?
Well,
You always kept your house in Lima, right?
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I met both of you was at John Martin's house.
Yes, I told her.
That's right.
And it was the night that Kennedy was elected. I
That's
think we
right.
stayed till about 1 o'clock, and the election went on till about 5 o'clock in the morning. And I remember Roy telling me at that time that he has the house. I have the house in Lima, Ohio. If anything doesn't ever work out, I've always got a house to go back to. And
We see Miss Honeywell wanted us to sell our house.
oh, she did?
Uh-huh. In fact, we hadn't been there too long when she suggested that.
Uh-huh.
And we just said between ourselves, no way would we sell that. Not that we was holding that over her head.
No.
But as you say, you had that independent feeling.
Yeah.
And Tom Gregg, that his dad owns the Gregg Company at home, he always told me, he said, Ag, if you ever come back from Wabash, don't come in and tell me. Just come in, hang up your hat, and go to work, which I could do today if I wanted to, see. And I knew that in that department I was all right.
Uh-huh.
And Roy could do the same thing with these friends of ours that had the catering business.
Yeah. Did no one ever lived in the house all the years you were gone?
Our house?
Yeah.
Only weekends. when
Only
we went home.
weekends.
Yeah. And you maintained the house
Yeah.
all these years?
It was a
yeah.
double brick.
Yes.
And see, and the kids lived on the other side. They kept their eye on it. See, in the wintertime, I had a thermometer in my house, and they could read the temperature. If my firelight ever go out, they'd go and check it for me.
Yeah. Your children lived in the house?
Yeah, my youngest daughter and her
Yeah.
family, husband family. But I forgot to tell you this one little incident we had with Miss Honeywell. We was going home, it was dark. It was dark enough we had heavy headlights on. We were just leaving. I don't know. And I'll never forget that incident. And when we pulled out of the driveway, Miss Honeywell was standing in the back door looking at us leave. And I told Agnes, boy, that just did something. I never did forget that. I told Agnes, I said, now, she can feel like she's awfully important all the time, but I says, she just hates to see us leave. Because I says, look at the poor soul standing there watching us leave in that great big house. I don't know if you've been in the house. I says, you'd be in that house from Friday night till Sunday afternoon by yourself. And as I say, people don't come to her house like you would your house and my house without making arrangements.
Sure.
And I says, it's not the nicest thing.
Yeah.
And
you just don't drive by and drop in.
No way.
No.
Yeah.
And I told Agnes, says, I think there's I always say a lot of jealousy with people. Some people in Wabash, she got all the money she's got, but I says, that's beside the point. I says, I don't care if she has got a lot of money, she's a human being.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we batted that down with
Yes, sir.
people in Wabash ever since we've been there.
Uh-huh.
They think she was a little high and mighty. And we'd tell them, we'd say, you don't know Miss Honeywell.
Just like with this little instance here when we was after the fire, she had a lot of toilet soap there with her initial EHH, and Mrs. John Nixon and Agness were talking about whether they should leave it there, and I spoke up and I said, well, if you're going to ask me, I says, by golly, I'd leave it, because after all, it wouldn't have been for Mrs. Honeywell, these university people wouldn't be about to be in here, because I'd be sure to leave all that kind of soap lay around like a sea, because after all, it's Mrs. Honeywell's goodwill that they're going to be using this house after all. And I'd leave that soap there.
Yeah.
But
Did they leave it?
yeah, they put it back in the rooms. See, it was an awful lot of toilet soap with the EHH on it, see.
Yeah.
And I said, after all, hadn't been for Miss Honeywell, they wouldn't be here and enjoying this house.
Yeah.
So many times, and I think maybe the people recognize this, you could call Mrs. Honeywell frigid. But when the three of us were there alone,
I don't know how many times she'd come up and she'd put her arms around me. She just seemed like she was hungry for closeness.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when she had, maybe I shouldn't tell this on
Go
there.
ahead. We can take it off when you get the you get the copy first. And
One-
you scratch out what you want.
Yeah, one morning she had such misery in her hips and in her back. And I said to her, I said, well, Miss Honeywell, if you want me to, I have something that'll help you. And she said, what? And I said, we have one of those electric hand massagers. And I said, I'll gladly massage your back and your legs if you want me to. She says, go get it. And for 2 or 3 different mornings, I'd go up there, and she'd get on her tummy, and I would just massage her, you know.
Uh-huh.
Well, there isn't 1 in 25 that she'd ever allow to do that.
Right, that's true.
But she said to me, oh, Agness, that did help. And I know it did.
Did Mrs. Honeywell have a pretty good sense of humor?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Could she find humor in a lot of little things?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And things that Roy would say. He'd come up with some of his Swedish remarks, you know, and she'd get a laugh out of it.
I know when we had been in the house, well, I don't know how long that furnace had been in, a couple of years now, and we had a furnace leak. See, the house was brand new.
Mm-hmm.
So the people in Fort Wayne come down and put a new section in it, so it wasn't long till that cotton picking section started leaking. So I went up one morning to her, and she was in bed, and I said, Miss Honeywell, you can tell me, that's the way I always approached her. I said, you can tell me to tend to my own business. But I says, that cotton picking furnace is leaking again. And I says, now, don't take my word for it. I says, I'm just using good common sense. I says, you take one section of the new section of that furnace, which I think there was about 6 or 8, put one new one in with 5 or 6 old ones. I says, expansion, contraction is going to be more or less, and I says, you're going to have trouble all along. And I says, it's no cheap matter to have to tear that furnace down all the time. I says, now, don't take my word for it, but I says, that'd be my doings. I'd pull that out and buy a new one. But I said, now, don't you take my word. You have somebody that's in the heating business. So it wasn't long till Gene Hipskin came up, and he told her about the same thing.
Yeah.
He put a new furnace in,
Yeah.
and it had any more trouble.
Oh.
But that's the way I always approached her. If I had some major operation, I'd go to her, just like the roof. They had a copper roof on the thing, and they didn't solder it right. And every year, every spring, we always had a leak.
Mm-hmm.
So one day I went up and I said, well, it's a nice thing to turn a brand new house like this, but I says, I would have that cotton picking thing taken off and a new one put up there. I said, every year, we've got to have the same trouble. So I said, now don't take my word for it. Get a roofer. He said the same thing. She finally put a new roof on.
Put a new roof on.
Put a new roof on. And George, she took copper off of that thing. See, when they soldered it, they didn't solder it right, and moisture got down in this solder, and freezing and thawing.
Expanded and
There we are. And I said, that's the way I always approach her. If I had something that's going to cost a lot of money, I said, you can always tell me to tend to my own business.
Yeah.
I always went out there like that.
Yeah.
But as a rule, she'd listen. She would check it out.
Yeah.
But you know, we never, well, I can say that we never talked to her, and it never entered our minds about all the money she had.
Mm-hmm.
We never went wild with anything. We'd watch grocery ads.
Mm-hmm.
And Roy would shop around for this or that. Now, she never told us to. That was our way of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And Miss Honeywell appreciated that.
Mm-hmm. How long did you work there until Mr. Honeywell went to the hospital?
5 years.
Oh, 5 years before he left for the hospital.
Mm-hmm. See, the 2 winters, we took care of him in Florida. And the second winter, though they came home in May, we always came home 2 weeks ahead of them.
Mm-hmm.
And every morning, though, he would come down, he'd pat my cheek, and he'd say, "You're a good woman." But when they came home that night, we drove 3 different cars to get their luggage and everything at Fort Wayne. So they couldn't get Mr. Honeywell off the plane. And I hadn't gone up yet, see. And Miss Honeywell finally said, she says, well, Agness, it's your turn next. And the minute he saw me, he put his arm in mine, and I said, come on, Mr. Honeywell, we're going home. Okay. So they had a nurse down there for the 2 weeks that we had come home ahead of him, and he didn't like her. And so we got in the station wagon, and she got in beside him. And, oh, that made him mad. And I said, well, that's all right, Mr. Honeywell. We're going to give her a ride home.
Yeah.
And but you had to jive him, then you could get along with him. Never push him, you know. And that's how we could take care of him and get along with him.
What kind of life what kind of a house and lifestyle was it in Florida? I have understood that it was a beautiful house.
It was a mansion.
Oh, yes.
And
the living room was, was about 16 by 22. Is a big one. And of course, I say, a lot of this house here in Wabash, the butler's pantry and all that, was copied after the
house in Florida.
Miss Honeywell she knew right where every chair, when she built that house, where every chair was going to sit down here, because she had
she made a template. And just knew where.
Where every chair was going to be.
When they would take tours in Florida up Indian Creek, well, Honeywell's house was the first house that they'd point out to the
tourists.
Or something down there, as if there's going to be a dinner. But Miss Honeywell always had regardless of what he's having, there's always a bunch of nice flowers came, see? And she'd always build a bouquet of flowers in front of that picture. I always got a big kick out of that.
This was an oil painting?
Yeah.
So then when she brought it here to Wabash, it's very prominent in the living room.
It was in the living room.
No flowers in front of it.
Yeah. Was that a pleasant time when you went to Florida and everybody was relaxed?
Well, no, because Mr. Honeywell really started getting bad down there. He'd run off.
Yeah. Mrs. Honeywell told me, and maybe she's told you the same stories about how back in the days in Florida when they first went down, maybe she's told you the same stories of how he used to like to go all the time in the parties and everything else, and then he'd finally say, we've got to stop, and they'd stop for a couple of days, and he'd say, well, we've got to go again. But I presume that you missed many of those years where they had where he was in good health and everything.
But she had a lot of parties though down there.
Oh, did she?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Big dinners, like 4 and 5 course dinners, you know.
And you had to do all the cooking for that?
What I'd been accustomed to doing, like I think every woman that works, you go home, you fry a little meat and open a can of something, you know what I mean? But I really cut my eye teeth with them. But I think I'm the type that I'll try it. It doesn't scare me, I'll say. Only when it would come to the meat, because that had to be real rare. But I always had good luck with it, didn't I?
She liked the meat rare.
Oh, yes.
I can tell you a funny one now. If this don't work out, I don't know who's going to hear this, but if it's...
You get to hear it first and scratch out what you don't want.
If you think it ought to be... I remember one time Mr. Honeywell was down there sitting at the table. I don't know if he had a guest or not, but anyhow, this Ethel Moore who was helping along, and she got a big kick out of the things that I'd say, see. So we were putting the finger bowls down this night, and of course, as you start one thing, you kept on going, and when I went in one time, I looked at Mr. Honeywell's finger bowl, and I seen his violet was gone. So I went out to Ethel, and I said, "Dear Jesus, Ethel, Mr. Honeywell done eat his violet."
We never did find it.
We never did find it. But Ethel got to laughing so hard she couldn't even go in with the next. I'd carry one, she carried one. If we had a lot of them, but anyhow, I had to kept it going with the finger bowls. But I said, "Dear Jesus, Ethel, Mr. Honeywell done eat his violet."
Yeah. Well, Mrs. Honeywell probably would have thought that was pretty funny.
She did.
Yeah.
She did. She knew about it.
Yeah.
And old Roy tell her different little happenings, you know, and she thought it was quite funny. And but we was just never say afraid of her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we were part of the household, and you had to get along that way.
Yeah. Was Mrs. Honeywell a good businesswoman, as what you could see, Roy?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yes, boy.
Uh-huh.
She could hold her own with businessmen as well as with us.
Definitely.
I know another little incident we had down there. Joe, you get a kick out of this. We had a big dish about that big around and had a lot of...
Don't tell that.
Don't tell her? You can scratch it out.
What is it? Go ahead. And
Well,
we'll cut it out when you get done.
Dog had... we had a dog who wasn't housebroke yet, see?
Uh-huh.
So we had guests at that house that night, and the dog messed up the rug. So Miss Honeywell told me, she said, Derickson, Bimby had an accident on the rug. I said, I'll take care of it, don't worry about it. In the meantime, Mr. Honeywell picked up this one dish and put it in that dish and took it and dumped it in the lavatory instead of putting it in the stool. And I told Miss Honeywell where's that, and I said, now don't worry about it. I'll get it out of there and take care of it. But what I was getting ready to tell you about this dish, I told Ethel, Miss Honeywell wants a salad put in this dish. She got the biggest kick out of that. Now you can scratch that now. Scratch
Did you ever
funny.
tell her that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, we told her.
Yeah.
We'd tell her about it, but it was really funny. I told Ethel, Miss Honeywell says to serve the salad in that dish.
Yeah.
Of course, I said she didn't know the dog what Miss Honeywell did with it. I said, but I got Ethel laughing about it.
Yeah. What would you say that Mrs. Honeywell's outstanding attribute was, or what was her best point?
Her outstanding one.
Point or attribute?
Well, you got me.
Well, obviously.
Well, I'll say her graciousness.
Yes, obviously, very graciously.
Graciousness, definitely.
Yeah, she did a lot of things a lot of people didn't know anything about.
Yeah. Did you ever see her get mad?
Oh yeah, yeah.
What would really get her mad?
Well, here's for instance that hadn't been too long ago. We had one of the last snows, wasn't it? When Miss Tarzan come down here. Miss Tarzan's coming down to see right after Christmas, see the Christmas tree. And just Miss Tarzan and Miss Honeywell and Agness said, well, gee, Roy, I got the whole luncheon is prepared. She said, why don't you work on it? I was working on the snow, getting the snow out of the way so she could get in and out. So the next morning I took her coffee up, and boy, she got on me about not being at the front door and with my black tie on, my coat, and serving the luncheon, setting the table. Says, look at Agnes doing all the work. I said, well, Miss Honeywell, Agnes says she could do it. Says for me to get the snow out of the way so she could get in and out. And I don't know, she really hopped on me, and I really flew back at her. I said, why don't you just get somebody else? I says, I've had it. And I walked out, and she was clapping her hands when we come back, and I never did go back.
That's your independence,
yeah,
right?
But you see, she wasn't well either.
No,
Yeah.
she wasn't well. Lots of times, George, she would get on to me something about something that wasn't amounting to nothing. Of course, Agnes would take more than I would. I wouldn't take too much. I'd tell her in a nice way, and then I'd cool off, and sometimes I'd apologize, sometimes I wouldn't. But that was, as I say, sometimes she didn't, when she wanted to tell you something, she didn't know, if she had guests there, she'd tell you the same thing. So,
Right in front of them,
Yes,
which
of course
we
I-
thought was poor man.
poor Mandy's.
Did looking back now, has this been a real satisfactory career for both of you? Would you, if you were going to do it all over again, would you have done the same thing?
I think so.
Yeah. Roy, would you?
Yeah. Sometimes yes, and sometimes no.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an experience. It's been hard for us to stay away from our home and our family in Lima.
Yeah.
And the driving back and forth each week, that kind of gets to you. But
What did the children think of you taking up this new career?
well, the one in Lima, she's a daddy's girl, and she didn't go for it at all. Of course, Mary Lou, she was out of the country so much with her husband. He was in the Navy. That it didn't make too much difference with them. But Miss Honeywell always liked to have them come to Wabash, which they did.
Did they come often?
He was lieutenant commander. Well, now like when they came from Alaska, and then they had to go to, they went to Washington then.
Well, she would love to have them come here.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd take us all out to the club to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she came back from
New Zealand, right?
New Zealand, she stopped in Honolulu, and she was a guest in their house, you see. And she kind of went for that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And she liked them. She saw an awful lot of them.
Your children in Lima used to come and visit you all?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
See, Miss Honeywell started planning a trip to go down to Mercer Bud and at Castleberry. See, around Christmas time they got snowbound here in Wabash, and they had to stay here a couple of extra days. And Miss Honeywell and Bud had been talking, and she was sort of planning on going down to see him in Castleberry.
She just loved that. She thought it was grand that they got snowed in Wabash and couldn't get out.
Mm-hmm.
But she was planning the trip.
Were your quarters comfortable at the house?
Oh,
fine.
yes. We have 5 rooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could have your own guests then.
Oh,
yeah.
sure.
I know lots of times we'd have guests come down there and they'd look out, especially in the summertime when those flowers and stuff would be blooming. They'd say, well, you got the prettiest view in the house.
You do.
Well, when
Yeah.
she'd have an open house,
Yeah.
and the guests, you know, would be down that far.
Yeah.
But, oh no, we was very comfortable.
I know several times when you have these open house. Of course, I most generally stayed in our apartment, and a lot of the ladies would come down, and once in a while you'd hear one of them say, "Now, pray tell me, what would she want with something like this?" And then I spoke up. I said, "Well, now, ladies, for your information, if we're not working, this is where me and Agness stay." And they'd kind of laugh and kind of settle their ego down there.
What are you going to do now?
Well, we're figuring on retiring for a little while. We're going to, I'd like to get a little job of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 hours a day, 2 or 3 days a week, but I don't want to work steady anymore.
You are definitely going to live in Lima now.
Oh, yeah.
Well, our home's there, and I'm the same way. I'm going to work.
Are you really?
Mhm.
You're going. You're going to keep
What?
plowing along, huh?
If I wasn't troubled with my leg, shoot, I wouldn't want to just stay. Now, just out there this morning working, my leg got to bother me. I got to get off of it for a while because it hurts so bad you can't hardly walk.
You're not thinking of opening a dancing studio? or
Oh,
something,
no,
right?
man, no. Now, see, when they had these big parties, toward the last, it kind of bothered me to get done sometimes if we had a big one.
Yeah.
Because when you have a big party, if you got over 5 to take care of, you're busy.
You're really hustling.
And, yes, you are. And
We hardly ever work less than 12 hours a day from the time we get up until we were through.
Mm-hmm.
But when we had a dinner or cocktail parties, it was nothing to work 16 and 18 hours.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't you sneak a nap in the afternoon, Roy?
No, well, I generally went downstairs right at lunch, after lunch, and sat for a little while, but, well, Georgia, there was 4 automobiles to look after.
Yeah.
And, of course, you had shopping to do, and I did all of that, most all of that.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, when she go on a buying trip like in Indianapolis or Chicago, then I'd have to go.
Yeah.
And the one time we went to Chicago, and she went to that Stop and Shop, I think it is. Well, this fella came out at that time, and she bought a lot of her liquors and stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
And this one colored fellow says to me, he said, "Boy, we got to get in." Of course, Miss Honeywell knew the boss pretty well, and he told this guy, he said, "Get that in that trunk of that car. Go, don't bring them back." So I said, "Well, we got troubles, ain't we? Because you can't put any in the front. You had to get it all in the trunk." And I said, "Oh, him and I got to laughing about it."
Yeah. Well, I think that we've pretty well covered anything and everything that we wanted to cover, and I enjoyed the conversation this afternoon.
Well, it all sums up that we loved her, and she was a gracious lady, and we miss her.
Yes.
And we will for a long time.
I'm sure that the entire community misses her.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Well, I was just telling the Nixons the other day. See, I had $100 operating money, and not once, George, in 17 years, when I would make out my slip for need more cash or more money, not once did she ever come. She very seldom called me Roy. It's Derickson. She said, "Derickson," not once did she says, "What's this for?"
Mm-hmm.
What's this for? If I eat out or always, of course, groceries are always listed as separately, but if it's something when on the other side wasn't groceries, she never once come to me and say, Roy, what's this for? Never once.
Yeah.
17 years.
Well, that's mark of a great woman that they're not petty, really.
Yeah.
That they're not petty.
Yeah.
And there were so many people that I imagine had difficulties or problems, and they would call Miss Honeywell and they'd want to talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
And she always had time to talk to them.
Yeah, well, I think that's nice.
I can remember one of my first, when she went out to lodge one time, I don't know what I was doing with her out there. And of course, we'd been with her quite a while at that time. She says, well, Derickson, I'll never forget that. She says, Derickson, if you'll stay with me, you'll never want for nothing. Well, up until she died, I never did want for nothing.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's
never once did I want.
But not too long ago, just before that fire happened, we was talking about a jacket.
Servant jacket.
And I said, Miss Honeywell, do you want me to look for a black double knit jacket? And she said, yes. And she said, do you know, I don't know of any two people that asks for so little like you and Roy.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about my uniforms, and she said, how long has it been since you've had a uniform? And they were still good. And I said, probably 4 years, something like that. Now, you see, I imagine maybe a lot of people would try to take her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or buy. And she said, I don't know of any two people that asks for so little.
Well, I think that's a good way to close this conversation, and believe me, I've appreciated it. And what will happen now is this will be typed, and they'll send you a copy, and then you correct it to add, subtract, or do what you want to, and then send it back, and then it'll go in the library for...
The only thing that I would say that maybe wouldn't be right for everybody to hear was about the dog.
Yeah, okay, you can, when you get the copy, scratch it out. And then they'll scratch it out, and it'll...
We'll send it to Lima
Yeah,
to us.
I'm going to get that address. And the last name is Derickson.
I-C-K.
Derickson. And the address in Lima?
144 Bellwood Drive, Post Office Box 716, Lima, Ohio 45802.
Good.
We still have our post office box till we come back from Florida.
Good. Well, I know that you're leaving tomorrow for Florida.
Not tomorrow, the
Don't let-
third, about the third.
Yeah.
No, we're leaving Wabash
We'll probably
tomorrow.
leave tomorrow.